Welcome to Practice Disrupted, a podcast exploring how architects can build better businesses, embrace emerging technology, and create more sustainable, fulfilling practices. I'm your host, Evelyn Lee, architect, angel investor, and founder of Practice of Architecture. Whether you're running a firm, starting your career, or reimagining what's possible, this podcast challenges you to think differently about the future of architecture. The built environment is changing fast. If you want to be one of the people leading that change rather than responding to it, join me this summer for Innovation in the Built Environment, a professional intensive from the University of Michigan's Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. Learn more at beradicallybetter.com. That's beradicallybetter.com. Hello, Disruptors. Welcome back to this week's episode of Practice Disrupted. This season, we have been exploring what it actually means to transform a practice, not just describe it. And one of the threads running through nearly every conversation is this: the architects doing the most interesting work are often the ones who refuse to follow the most obvious path. Today's guest is a case study in that. William Dodge grew up 50 feet from a tobacco field in eastern North Carolina. He applied to architecture school 4 times. He moved to the tiny island nation of Malta at 19 because he thought Y2K might end civilization and figured he would rather ride that out in the Mediterranean. He took out trash and recycling as a janitor at NC State Libraries, overheard someone complaining that Snowhetta couldn't deliver the wayfinding maps they needed, and said he would do it. That wayfinding project got him in front of the chancellor of the university, and within 3 years, he was a principal at a major firm. He went on to help transform Hanbury's North Carolina office from 2 people and no work to 49 hires in 49 months and $2.5 billion worth of projects. Then he left because he made himself unnecessary, which turned out to be exactly the point. Today, William is founder and design principal at Public, co-founder of the public art practice A Gang of 3, and a consulting principal to firms across multiple continents, working as an on-contract senior partner to firm leaders who need someone who has actually done the thing before. Let's get into the conversation. Hi, William. Welcome to Practice Disrupted. We're so happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me. It's a cool opportunity. I listen to your podcast all the time. Actually, I listened to your podcast before I even knew you, which I think is really interesting. So it's like a full circle.
Oh, well, thank you for that. So I think one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on is I've been talking a lot more about portfolio careers and what it means to build a portfolio career, and you've assembled quite an interesting one. But why don't we start with how you got into architecture and go from there? Because we always start with the same beginnings.
Yeah, so I grew up, I was born in Raleigh, North Carolina, but I moved to Greenville, North Carolina, which is in eastern North Carolina when I was little. I think preschool. And I grew up about 50 feet from a tobacco field in eastern North Carolina. So for me, like the closest thing to architecture we had was like the cool old tobacco barns in my youth. And I love those buildings. They're amazing. I wish people would make more of an effort to save them, but I wasn't necessarily surrounded by design excellence or architecture, right? And then when I was in the 8th grade, I moved back to Raleigh and befriended a woman, Laura, well, a girl at the time, now a woman, my friend Laura Harmon, whose father, Frank Harmon's one of the most preeminent architects in the Southeast United States. And kind of started going over there and hanging out with her. And it was my first exposure to really kind of like fantastic architecture, really amazing space. And I just started thinking more and more about, how unusual that was in North Carolina, and particularly in my experience in North Carolina, and how such kind of spaces and places and thinking might be able to positively impact society. That's the main reason why I went into architecture. I never had grand illusions that I was going to make a lot of money or design houses for rich people or, do skyscrapers or anything. I just really wanted to help people. And I thought it was a good way to do it.
And I think what's really interesting is, so your path immediately starts from like architecture school applications in a unique way. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, so it was funny. I was not the best student, and I was bad at math and spelling. I couldn't. I was terrible at science. I couldn't draw at all. So I always joke that like my path to architecture was like pretty obvious. I was either gonna like become an architecture person or like become like a bank robber. There's really not really anything in between. But I applied to architecture school 4 times before they eventually let me in, and then they kicked me out twice. And now they ask me for money and to hire their students. It's funny how that works. Started undergrad at NC State, and then started getting a little bit of wanderlust. So I ended up applying for directly to the University of Malta when I was 19. This would have been in 1999. And so I ended up going to this tiny little island nation of Malta for 2 years, and then ended up coming back. And when I came back, a lot of that coursework didn't transfer. So I ended up creating my own major, which was a multidisciplinary studies degree, which at the time was really hard to find a job with. But in hindsight, gave me a lot of really interesting perspective. And ultimately, I ended up applying for and finishing my master's at NC State. But then when I was graduating, there was nobody hiring in America. I think I applied for I think the final count that I actually stopped counting, but it was over 300 jobs. And I did get offered a job in Idaho Falls, Idaho. And I was married at the time. My stepdaughter was 14. And they had a pitch to me was, get your car in the family and come out here. And I was like, wow, I really want to go out there and see it first. I don't want to move my family out to Idaho Falls without at least seeing it. And they said, well, we don't have any money for that. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, this is the only job in America. You can either have it or not. I got 200 other people that are really interested in this job. And I was like, I can't do that to my family. So I turned down this opportunity that, ultimately was the right decision, because I ended up getting the job that changed my life so shortly thereafter, which was a janitor at NC State Libraries, which was a pretty interesting experience. I ended up finding myself working on this exhibition design at NC State. They were looking for a part-time exhibition designer, and I worked on that, and I finished that, and I had become pretty tight with all the people at NC State Libraries at the time. And it was right when they were building Hunt Library, the Snowhead award-winning Hunt Library. And they wanted to keep me around, but there weren't any jobs except for this facilities maintenance technician job. They told me that, and I said, I'll take it. And they said, you know what that is? I said, I have no idea. I said, that doesn't matter, man. I need a job. And he said, it's a janitor. And I was like, well, that's cool. I'll do that. So I took out trash and recycling for 4 or 5 months. And then it was pretty interesting because one time I overheard them complaining about the fact that they couldn't get Snowheaded to design the wayfinding maps for Hunt Library, right? And then I mentioned to them, well, I'll do it. And they said, really, janitor guy? You'll do this? And I said, yeah, and they'll be so beautiful. You use them 15 years from now. And they looked at me and started laughing. And they said, well, what do you charge us? And at the time, I'm making $9 an hour. I was like, I don't know, $25 an hour, thinking that was like really high. And they were like, oh my God, that's it. And I was like, oh, Jesus, I just left a lot of money on the table, right? Yeah. They were like, here's $100, give us 4 hours of your time. Let's see what you got. And so I did the wayfinding maps for the mezzanine level of Hunt Library. And they were like, this is amazing. Like, we love this. And I was like, I know you would. I told you you would. And they said, well, send us that file. We're going to go give a big presentation at the university. And I said, well, I can send you the file. And if I do that, it's just a still image. But if I go and give the presentation, like, I built a digital model to make this stuff. And then I can fly them around the digital model and talk about all the different uses that you can use this digital model for, like interactive room reservation system, or, you can fly through the building virtually or whatever. And they said, you don't mind doing that? I said, I don't care. I mean, I'll talk to anybody.
That is a steal for $100 there.
Yeah. So they said, well, I ended up getting paid more to do the whole project, but that was just this one particular thing. So I go and I give this presentation in front of the chancellor and the university librarian and everything. They said, congratulations, William. This is amazing. You got yourself a job for $25 an hour. And I was like, God, I really should have told him more money. But it was interesting because of that. It gave me a unique perspective. Like, Snowhead is one of the best design practices globally. And the client was still having a hard time getting them to give them what they needed. But what it did was it gave me the perspective that it doesn't matter what your reputation is or what your design capabilities are. Sometimes not everything you're doing is right for a client. And so being able to have this kid that's a janitor be able to do these maps that they still use, by the way. And, I have since pursued a lot of work with Snowhead, and I give them a hard time about the fact that my only reason my entire career is dependent on their inability to be able to do this stuff. But it gave me a unique perspective, because I think a lot of times we tend to revere these practices and thinking like every building they do, every project they touch is amazing and perfect. And that's just totally not true. But because of that catapulted by experience and my opportunities, and I ended up becoming a principal at a major firm less than 3 years later, specifically because of that. Whereas all my other friends that were giving me a hard time that I didn't take the Idaho Falls job, it took them 10, 15 years to get to that level. So, yeah. And it's, a lot of people tend to kind of gloss over aspects of things like that in their career. Like everybody's got a job, like where they're waiting tables or being a substitute teacher or whatever, that they may not necessarily want to talk about. I'm super proud of that. Like, I think it's important to know where you came from and to know where you're going. And I think I know one of the biggest problems in our industry is there's a super high level of snobbery, where you went to school, who you worked for, etc. And my work and my perspective is completely anti that. In my own practice, in my strategy practice, in my public art practice, everything I do, it's really important to me to try and provide a concrete example to others to look at, to say, it doesn't matter where you went to school. It doesn't matter how well you did in school. It doesn't matter where you worked or whatever, that you can make a difference and your value matters, right? It doesn't matter what your Rolodex is, what your bank account looks like. You have the opportunity to make a difference. Go make it count.
I appreciate that. I think it takes a certain individual with a drive, a certain level of drive and persistence to apply to architecture school 4 times, right? And then,
yeah.
And then I don't know if it's restlessness or just like constant pursuit and curiosity to leave that environment and go live on a tiny island and then come back.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I moved to Malta in 1999. My dad had traveled all over the world before he met my mother, and I spoke a lot of different languages, and I was just always really fascinated by the wider world, and I was exposed to a lot of that when I was a kid. So, I mean, for me, like when I was 18, I went to the UK and hitchhiked around for an entire summer by myself. Like I slept in an abandoned car in one of the most dangerous parts of London for a weekend. Like, I mean, it's like, that's the kind of person I am. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? Okay, well, none of us are getting out of this thing alive anyway. So why not really just go and live your life, do what you can. I'd rather live my life to the fullest than gain a couple extra boring days when I'm old. But when I moved to Malta, it was 1999. Everybody was really scared about this whole Y2K thing. And I had read this article about these Americans that had moved to this tiny island nation that was basically built by the Knights Hospitaller. So basically it's the Crusaders. It was stunningly beautiful. They spoke English. It was cheap. And they loved Americans at the time. And I was like, why would I not? If the world goes to hell with this Y2K thing happens, I'd much rather be on a tiny island in the Mediterranean than in eastern North Carolina in America. I just find that to be very interesting. So that's why I went.
But in 2016, you kind of found yourself searching for a different island. Do you want to tell us that story?
Yeah. So in 2016, I had been running the higher education practice for another firm, the firm that I went to work with after my experience at Hunt Library. I'd had some other stops in between too as well. I was in manufacturing and did a handful of other things. But in 2016, due to a variety of reasons, not the least of which being the election, I was really interested in getting out of the country permanently. And I had applied for a variety of different jobs all around the world. And I ended up having the opportunity to interview with, there's an Italian architect that at the time, no Americans really knew who he was, but now he's kind of become a big deal. His name's Carlo Rotti. So he was most recently the curator for the Venice Biennale, for this last architecture Venice Biennale. So he was looking for somebody to run his practice in Turin, Italy. And I happened to be in Italy anyway, so I went to go meet with him. Super nice, wonderful firm, did amazing work. It wasn't a right fit. I don't speak Italian, so I think that was a big part of why I didn't get the job. But it was interesting to get a chance to, be considered essentially to run a practice at that level. And then I had an opportunity the night of the election, actually. I had sent stuff, my immigration stuff to a variety of different places, in particular in New Zealand, because I wanted to try and get as far away from America as possible. And I had a recruiter call me and said, "Hey, the best firm in New Zealand's looking for somebody to run the practice. I think you could be a good fit." And it was with my buddy Andrew Patterson. I ended up connecting with him. We were supposed to talk for 30 minutes. We talked for like 3 hours, just like really super hit it off. And looked like that might happen. I was married at the time, and she was super excited about it until it became real. And then like the opportunity like became real. And then I think she started getting really nervous. And I get that. I mean, not everybody's just going to jump on a boat like I am. So we ended up kind of tabling that discussion. But years later, when I ended up going out on my own, he and I reconnected. And so now we work together all the time very closely. I think we've been to 5 continents together now. It's either 4 or 5. I actually lose track. But so I work with Andrew regularly now. But the only reason why I know him is because I submitted some immigration paperwork the night of the election in 2016. It's funny, he won his practice won Global Cultural Building of the Year of the World Architecture Festival in 2023. And I went to Auckland to celebrate with him, and he was having this huge party, and everybody's like, "How on earth do you know each other? Like, you're this like, super interesting New Zealand architect, like very fancy, like, Pritzker level architect, and you're this kind of this dude from Eastern North Carolina." And he was like, "Oh, it's easy. Donald Trump introduced us." But
Oh, wow. That's
yeah,
hilarious.
but essentially that's how that happened. But it was interesting because what I learned from talking to Andrew or, some of these other people was, it doesn't matter where you go in the world. The problems are the same. They're just the nuances are different, right? How do you run a practice? How do you hire great people? How do you deal with clients? How do you win work? All those are the things that everybody's dealing with. It's just there's totally unique nuances. But I think that's the thing that's been really valuable to me is to understand those nuances globally and try and figure out a way to synthesize them in my own practice. And I think that's part of the reason why our public art practice has been so successful and some of my strategy work has been so successful too, just kind of seeing how different people from around the world do things.
Yeah. So you've alluded to the public art and you've alluded to strategy. And I think it's time to kind of bring it to the present day. Why don't we talk a little bit more about what you are doing today? And it's also interesting for me to hear you say my practice, because I do also know that you're contractually associated with firms. So let's talk about all those threads.
Yeah. In 2016, after those things did not work out, I had an opportunity I got recruited by a former client of mine he had just become the CEO at a firm called Hanbury in North Carolina. And they were looking to grow their office and expand their opportunities, diversify their portfolio, et cetera. And so I ended up starting with them. I had like a bunch of audacious demands. He was asking me if I was interested, and my point to him was just like, I'm only going to be interested if I have the opportunity to be really successful. And these are the things that I would need to be very successful. A lot of firms, a lot of times they want somebody to start and then grow by winning work, and then they can go and hire, an intern or a young designer or another person, and you kind of grow that way. That's a terrible way to do it, to be honest, because by the time you need to hire, you're never hiring the right person. You're never hiring the best talent. And so my pitch to David was, hey, in order to do the kind of work that you're talking about doing, this is what we would need to do. Like we would need to bring on a buddy of mine that I trust to be my business partner, so I can handle the operations and the business and strategy, and he can be the quote unquote architect, because that's too much for one person to do. And in order to be able to grow the practice and transform the portfolio the way that we want, we're going to need to hire the best talent. So basically, I need a blank checkbook essentially to hire whoever we want, and we're going to lose money in spectacular fashion for 24 to 36 months. But by doing that, we're going to be really strategic about how we do that. And we're going to, chase work and do different kinds of work that the firm is not used to doing. It's going to be very uncomfortable. But after that, dump trucks full of money are going to start showing up at the office. And that's essentially what happened, which was great, because what we did is basically by getting David to agree to those things, we ended up having the ability to go hire all the best talent, bring all that best talent in. I'm really great at identifying talent. And by bringing all the best talent in, not only bring them in, but empower them, build a culture of design culture and entrepreneurial spirit, but also a spirit of empowerment. Like if a 23-year-old designer that just graduated 6 weeks ago has an idea, that's just as important as my idea or anybody else's idea. And so by setting up the culture that way, we got all the best people. Because we got all the best people, we got all the best clients. Because we got all the best clients, we started winning all the best work. So we went from, and this is not because of me by any means. This is like some of the things that I helped to put in place and identified early on, but we recruited all the best people, which helped us do all these things. So 4 years later, we kind of got them to the point that they didn't need me anymore. I'd set out to do what I wanted to do. The company was not doing great before I joined, and the office was going to close. When I left, they're the most successful firm by far in the state of North Carolina, if not the Southeast United States. And they've only gone on to explode even more due to many of my former partners and their expertise. But it was interesting because had we not been empowered to do those things the specific way we did it, that firm probably wouldn't even exist anymore because of COVID. So it was interesting. In 2022, after kind of I had started having these kind of self realizations of they didn't need me anymore, I was just looking for a new opportunity. So I decided I was going to go out on my own and try and amortize my value to different firms around the world in order to kind of really leverage my expertise to help others get to where they need to be. I really like helping people, and I like to help grow practices. But I also don't ever want to be an employee. I don't want to work for people. I want to work with people, essentially in a partnership situation. So I have my own strategy practice, but my strategy practice is it's on retainer. It's under contract with other practices. So I essentially work as an on-contract part-time senior partner to different practices globally.
So most people, when they grow a firm, I don't think they ever say like they've outgrown the firm or the firm's outgrown them. So what exactly were you feeling after 4 years where you just felt like you were ready to move on? Just because if you think about all of the firm leadership right now that's having a hard time stepping away and how many like private equity and acquisitions are happening because of that, it's kind of interesting to have that perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it's just my personality because I'm always interested in, where I can have the most impact. It would have frankly been extraordinarily boring to me if I had been there for another 5 years and not been able to have the same kind of impact that I had. It's like I told the CEO when I was leaving that I could be there another 50 years and have a tenth of the impact I had in the first 4. And like, they just didn't need me anymore. I had never come to that practice with the plans to run that practice one day or make it entirely my own or anything like that. It was a firm that really needed help. It was a good opportunity for me, both personally and professionally. And I wanted to help set this firm up and to have the opportunity to make a difference in the place in which I lived. And so I was able to do that. And I think my entire life, I've tried to create situations where there's no winners and losers, but everybody wins. And this to me was a perfect opportunity of that. So I wasn't looking for it to be my own practice. I just wanted to help them get to where they didn't need me anymore. And then it was time to move on, which is the way I approach my strategy practice. If I'm doing my job right, I'm not working with the same people 5 years later, like, because I'm helping them get to where they need to be to solve a problem or whatever. It's kind of like if you go to the chiropractor. Go to the chiropractor twice a week for 10 years. There's something bigger going on, right? It's a bigger problem, right? I want to be able to help people, not necessarily just be an employee. If I wanted to be an employee, I would just go to a practice.
So another thing that you mentioned was amortizing your value, which I don't think I've ever heard out of an architect's mouth before. Talk to me about what you feel like amortizing your value is and like that uniqueness you're bringing.
Yeah, I just want to be able to bring a wide perspective to people's practices. I'm really good at a lot of different aspects of the practice that most traditional architects are not. But if you tried to have me do a building set, it would fall down. Everybody would die. People would get sued. So it's like I'm terrible at those things. I'm a good designer, don't get me wrong, but I'm better at strategy, running a practice. And there are other people out there for sure that are great at PR, great at marketing, are good at recruiting, are good at winning work, or programming, consultants or whatever. But those people typically are good at one of those things. I just happen to be uniquely talented at multiple of those things. And those people typically haven't started offices from scratch, hired 40 people, made sure Christmas came that year for those people's kids, made sure they had work to do when they were in the office, won big deal projects with pain in the ass clients, put together complex international project teams and design buildings from beginning to end. I've done all this stuff. So when I'm working with my clients and my collaborators, it's really more of a partnership situation. Like, I'm beholden to them, yes, but they're also beholden to me. Like, if they make me look bad, then it blows up my entire business model. So I'm very selective of who I work with. It's really a two-way street. And so, like, for me, my job is to give them advice. Sometimes that's on how to build work. Sometimes it's how to grow the portfolio or awards or hiring people. It's kind of all those things. So I essentially work as an on-contract senior partner to the CEO. And so instead of basically joining a permanent partnership situation, it's harder to split up a business relationship than it is to get divorced. So for me, my whole thing is kind of like, we work on a 12-month contract, we can option to renew, et cetera. And with the plan is it's 4 to 5 years at the absolute most. We're probably not going to be working together anymore, but that's by design. Right? Like, they're hiring me to help them solve a problem. And yeah, whether or not they listen to me is really on their end. It's their call. But my job is to give them my advice because I've been there before and I'm offering advice as a peer, not as an employee.
One, I'd love to understand, how that pitch goes. Like, how do you find these firms that are interested in this very unique model? Two, I would also love, and I know this is a multi-part question, so take it however you want to. I'd love to understand why you chose that route instead of, most people would say, I'm going to be an outside strategic partner. You can hire me as a consultant, but you're really designating yourself and your time to one firm for an extended length.
Yeah. And I would say my clients, typically what they need me for is advice and direction and strategy consulting. They don't need me as an employee. And what I try to do is keep my costs down. So I'm not inexpensive by any means, but I end up costing those firms less than what it costs them to employ a junior level designer because I'm a consultant. I'm just straight cost. There's no multiplier on my cost, right? There's no benefits or anything like that. So I end up basically more often than not, end up being the cheapest person that they pay for, and I'm making millions of dollars. And so my whole idea is, and the whole approach to my practice is trying to do more with less, right? You don't need my time 10 hours a week or 20 hours a week. You only really need me when you need me, but when you need me, you really, really need me, right? Like, you're trying to pursue a project here. Well, I've got a relationship with that person that I've known for 20 years, and I know X, Y, and Z, engineers and relationships there. And how can I put together pieces and parts to be able to help you be successful? Basically, how this came out is when I was at Hanbury and other places, actually, I had helped a handful of friends of mine from major firms around like Flato, for example. I helped them win several projects that ended up being, huge moneymakers, huge opportunities. There's the new Amy Gutman Hall at University of Pennsylvania. I helped put together that entire project team. I wasn't involved in the project, and I was really more just trying to help my friends out. Like, hey, you guys should know these people. You should know this engineer, et cetera. And it turned into a $140 million project. Okay, well, there's value there. How do you get paid for that value? And, one of the things that I've realized is, like, I love architects, but Jesus, our egos are enormous and we're extraordinary pains in the ass. Like, and so the last thing I want to do is sit around and argue with somebody because I've had certain people say, well, can you work with me on, like, if you bring in work, we'll pay you a percentage. I'm like, I don't want to track that. One, I don't want to waste my time tracking all that stuff. And two, I don't want to argue with you because you feel like because you played Little League with this guy once when you were 9 years old, somehow that makes it your relationship and not the work that I did. I'm not interested in doing that. So I just work on a flat fee. This is what I get paid. It shows up in my bank account on the first of every month. And then we work together. We have a 12-month contract. I represent you, whether it's and typically it's exclusive by region or by project type. So I might I mean, I haven't had this happen. I was talking to two different people at one time, where one was doing like K-12 public safety and one was doing a lot of cultural work. It was very different kinds of work. So there may occasionally be an overlap there, but I tend to try and spread out my clients to create a situation where there's never any possibility of a conflict of interest or competition. If anything, actually, my client in New Zealand and my client in Malta have both become buddies. So maybe there's an opportunity we could pursue work together. I mean, very, very real. I remember when I went to Malta to go see our friends in Malta, Andrew from New Zealand flew over to meet us there because he wanted to hang out because he loves those guys. So it's, how do you create an ecosystem where everybody wins is what I'm looking for.
This episode is brought to you by the University of Michigan's Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning. I am teaching their professional intensive course, Innovation in the Built Environment, and it is designed for practitioners who are ready to think differently about how the built environment gets made. Whether you're an architect, planner, developer, or somewhere in between, this course gives you the frameworks, the language, and the cross-sector perspective to lead change from wherever you sit. 5 weeks of virtual sessions, plus an in-person intensive in Detroit. Find out more and register at beradicallybetter.com. That's beradicallybetter.com. Right. So when you refer to your practice then, so it sounds like you can work with more than one firm at a time. Are you a sole practitioner or is there others supporting you?
Yeah, it is just me. I mean, I do. There are people I occasionally lean on for specific tasks. If it ever arose where I was busy enough, there is somebody I would love to be able to bring on full time. And I've talked about having another friend in New York. We've talked about the opportunity of maybe combining our practice. She's doing something similar-ish. She's more of an operations person, but we've talked about that. But it's never been the right fit or the right time. So for me, it's like a lot of consultants, and this is a different way. I mean, this is the way that I'm differentiated, whether it's good or bad. It really depends on your perspective. I'm not looking for every client. I'm not looking to try and make as much money as I can. I just want to work with cool, good people doing great work, have fun, make a difference, get paid my value. That's what I want to do. Whereas like a lot of consultants want to try and work with as many people as humanly possible. I am super not interested in doing that. So when I'm working with a client, I represent them, but they also represent me. Like we're tied to each other, essentially. So for me, it's if I have a client, in the Mediterranean and a collaborator in New Zealand, and then maybe one in America, that's like an ideal situation for me. And I had that until fairly recently. I was working with a firm in Philadelphia who was fantastic. I really loved them. It's actually really interesting. This is how I knew I was really onto something. Their market was in K-12 and public safety. There's two markets I knew absolutely nothing about. Like nothing. Like less than nothing. I mean, I went to public school and I want the cops to come or the fire department to come if I call them. That's literally all I know about these things. But I knew the people that knew about those markets, and they were trying to grow the practice, hire right people, pitch their portfolio in a certain way. And we ended up working together, and we won over $300 million worth of work kind of through those relationships that I had, through the relationships that they had, that we were able to find new opportunities to be able to leverage the portfolio, et cetera. And we were thinking it was going to probably be 4 or 5 years. And ultimately, their ultimate plan eventually was to get out and to sell the firm. And that just happened after 2.5 years, which was great. It's a great case study. But what that also means I don't have a client anymore, which is both good and bad. I mean, in full disclosure, I was actually planning in about 6 months to maybe have a conversation on whether or not they did continue to need me, because we had kind of gotten to where we needed to be sooner rather than we thought. I mean, there were still other things that needed to be resolved that we were pursuing, but I don't want somebody to pay me just to sit around and do nothing. Like I want to help people, so because that inhibits me from being able to help somebody else. So.
And you are definitely not a person that sits around and does nothing. You also started your public art practice at Gang of Three. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about that as well?
And it's funny that you mentioned that I'm not a person that sits around and does nothing. I had drinks with a prospective client last night, and he was like, "What do you do for hobbies?" And I was like, "Oh God." I was like, "I don't actually know." It's really sad. I do what I love. Like, I truly love what I do. So I'm always working, but I'm always on vacation at the same time. And I don't know if that's really wonderful or incredibly sad. It's maybe a little bit of both. I don't know.
I think it's actually pretty wonderful.
Yeah, no, I can't.
And you can, as long as you
Yeah,
keep the burnout to the side, like you're getting paid to do what you love. How many people can really say that?
yeah, that's the trick, right? It's interesting because the running your own practice is always a tricky thing. Sometimes it's feast or famine. It's very stressful, and sometimes you make less money than you would if you were a full-time employee or a partner. But at the same time, I've never been happier, and I'm so extraordinarily glad that I did what I did. But in 2020, so we were all sitting around the house. There was nothing going on, basically. And we were trying to figure out, I was trying to figure out something to do. And myself and a friend of mine, actually, that I worked with at NC State when I was doing exhibition design before I became a janitor, we had started pursuing some public art projects together, just to kind of give us something to do. And there was an opportunity that came up for this quote unquote creative education floodplain display, whatever that means. I think they couldn't call it public art because they didn't want people to get upset that they were spending taxpayer money on public art. So it had to be educational. And I had a friend in Philadelphia, oddly enough, who had just left Olin and decided to start his own practice on ground control. It's Will Belcher, who's fantastic. And I remember thinking, maybe there's an opportunity for the three of us to partner together and pursue this project. And at the time, that sounded like a good idea. Will ended up getting so busy, which is great. His practice just took off like a rocket. We didn't really anticipate that. But he was able to be involved, but he wasn't able to come down and travel as much as he would like. So Lincoln and I took on kind of a majority of that role. But we ended up winning this project, and it was a tiny little $50,000 total project cost project. And what we ended up doing was, instead of doing a mural, which is what they thought they were going to get basically for $50,000, we tried to figure out a way to pixelate the site with data. And one of the things, as I mentioned, one of my big things is trying to do more with less. And so what we tried to do is figure out what was the best way to be able to maximize our impact. And so what we ultimately ended up doing was doing this 2-acre pixelated immersive floodplain display, basically with a series of 25 different flood markers that are all uniquely color coordinated. So there's maybe 2 or 3 for each particular storm. And what we did is be able to leverage a horrific flooding situation to be able to put it on display in real time to cars and people walking by. And at the time, we didn't realize what we were doing, but essentially we created the world's first totally dynamic climate change memorial that put that stuff on display for people to see in full force. And because of that project, it ended up winning, I think we're up to over 20 national and international design awards or finalists or whatever. And it was completely unexpected, but for me, it was like the perfect example of kind of how we like to work as individuals, because like Lincoln and Will, my two partners on the project, and Lincoln is my full-time business partner for Gang 3. That's how we like to work anyway. It's like, how do you maximize your impact? You don't need to necessarily spend a ton of money or a ton of time or use a lot of material to have a big impact, which is exactly how I approach things with my strategy practice and with my entire career. We can talk about sustainability all we want, but if we're using a lot of embodied carbon, how sustainable is it really? And so it's for us, it's like, how do we tell a big story with its minimal effort? And I think it just resonated with a lot of people because of the attention that project got. It unintentionally basically started a larger practice for us. We had to incorporate right when we were signing the contract, and then we just ended up continuing to win different projects throughout the years. And I think we're in year 6 now, and it's been pretty interesting to see the type of attention and the kind of interest that our tiny little projects, because all our projects are tiny. And the largest project we've done to date was a $200,000 total construction cost, and we're our own contractors on all this stuff in order to make it work. But it's been really interesting to have conversations with some of the best designers in the world that are very familiar with our work and use our work sometimes as precedent studies, which has been pretty interesting. But because of the attention that we've gotten from that, and this is a long answer, sorry, but because of the attention we've gotten from that, we get invited to these really interesting opportunities to go and speak in Barcelona or in Singapore or have our work exhibited in China or whatever it is, which gets us in the doors that most designers wouldn't be able to get in otherwise, which is also really great for my strategy clients because all of a sudden I'm meeting all these prospective clients and people that they should know that they would never in a million years be able to get to know. But since I'm doing that, it essentially creates this wider ecosystem, unintentional but highly effective ecosystem for doing business.
So you brought me in on one of your Fast Company articles. There's one that I will make sure to link to in the show notes where you talk about our industry as we know it will soon cease to exist. You also said that that's not a bad thing. So what do you think disappears, I guess, and then what do you think takes its place?
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's not that it's not terrifying. It's scary as hell. Like, I mean, like when we're talking about AI and things like that, I mean, it's terrifying. Everybody's worried about, losing their jobs, et cetera. It would be great if we lived in some utopian society with the universal income and all that stuff. That does not exist, nor will it ever exist in the United States, at least. But that said, when it comes to our industry, it's interesting when you ask people what architects do. And by the way, I don't think most architects actually really know what architects do.
I don't think most architects can distill anything of what they do down to a single sentence.
Yeah, exactly. Well, certainly not myself. But, the interesting thing about the AI kind of revolution that we're encountering now is, when you ask somebody on the street what an architect does, I think they have these grand visions of this hyper creative kind of inventor, master artist, master builder, like thinking about Bucky Fuller or, even going back to the ancient Egyptians or ancient Chinese, like there's this kind of creative genius that can really impact the built environment. That's not really what we do now. We're more like facilitators of buildings, in particular in this country. Not that there's not people doing great architecture, but it's to meet a need. It's a needed thing. But a lot of our time, just due to our industry, is caught up both documenting drawings and reducing risk. And as AI continues to develop, I just do not foresee, and I know for a fact, by the way, that many different design firms are using AI to create construction drawings. And as that continues to get perfected, there's no reason to think, I think it would be naive to think that AI is not going to be doing window details and construction drawings. And so all of a sudden, you're not really going to need as many production people. But what that does is it frees up people to have the opportunity to explore more, be more creative. Now, what does that mean? It also means that the workforce is going to be tremendously reduced, or that these larger companies are going to get significantly smaller. That's bad in some ways. It's also extraordinarily good in other ways, because that means that like you and I and two random people on the street might be able to go and start our own practice, and all of a sudden we'd be competing with some of the top architects in the world, because it's really more at that time really based on ideas, and then being able to leverage things like production through using artificial intelligence. And that's what I mean when I say it's going to soon cease to exist. I'm very bullish on the fact that the large firms will either no longer be in business or will look tremendously different in the next 10 years. I would be absolutely shocked if that is not the case. Just being aware of what I'm aware of.
So we said that architects probably can't really articulate what they're doing now. Where does that really push our work in the future then, especially those smaller, nimble firms?
Yeah, I think it pushes us into becoming creative directors. We really become creative directors of the built environment rather than, somebody who's just facilitating drawings or making sure to mitigate risk. I really think that's the direction that our industry is going to go, whether we like it or not. The sooner that people start to kind of wrap their brain around where their place is in the world, in that kind of world, it's going to be better for them. For the people that are close to retirement, it's not really going to matter. For people that are mid-career, I mean, they're definitely going to see a change. For the people, the concern that I have is the people that are in school right now are the super young designers. I think I should say I'm somewhat concerned about that, but also those are the people that are most fluent in this type of technology. So actually, they're going to be the ones that are going to be leading a lot of this change. My concern is there may not be as much opportunity for mentorship. But if anything, it actually potentially flips the script on mentorship, because then all of a sudden it's the young designers that are going to be mentoring some of the older designers on how these things work.
If our ego can get out of the way. Yeah.
Yeah. If anything, I actually think it kind of democratizes the system a lot better. And maybe what it does is it helps to improve the American built environment. I don't know. I mean, I'm not naive enough to think that that's going to be the case, but it's a possibility. You know, a lot of the reason why our built environment looks the way it does is because there's risk mitigation. You know, so if you can all of a sudden be able to take that stuff out of the equation where everybody's using the same details, everybody's using these kinds of things, and then it really just becomes about design thinking, maybe that's a good thing for our built environment, right? Is there an opportunity to start to reduce, you know, the amount of steel or the amount of concrete or whatever in really unique ways to be able to create more forward-thinking, sustainable, efficient buildings? You know, I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I'm not an AI evangelist. I'm just a realist. Like, I'm not super stoked about this direction, but it is the reality. So it's what I foresee, at least.
So we've had this conversation, and I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that you actually never got your architecture license.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Whenever I give a presentation, I always started off with 2 truths and a lie. It's kind of like a dating profile, like hack. Where it's like you give like 2 truths about yourself and 1 lie, and then see if there's somebody can figure it out. And so mine are always: I was once a licensed taxi driver in my hometown. I once slept in an abandoned car in the most dangerous part of London for 3 days. And I am an architect. And the lie is, of course, I am not an architect, because I never bothered to get my license. So the other 2 are definitely true. I appreciate my time as a taxi driver and as a janitor and all those other things, and maybe the person that I am. But yeah, no, for me, I get asked this question a lot. I think that in our industry, and particularly in America, I should say, we are very adamant that you should, and I actually had this conversation with a student today, that we're very adamant that you should get your license. And I think that that's important, but it's also not for everybody. And, you know, the main reason for me of not getting my license was it's not the best use of my time. The best use of my time is growing a practice, winning a practice, winning work, hiring people, helping to design. It's not sitting around and stealing drawings and doing details. That's just not my skill set. It's not the highest and best use of my time. So for me to go and get a license, I've got for me to go and study for all these tests, et cetera, the opportunity cost is extraordinarily high. Like, it just doesn't make any there's no business sense for me to do that. You know, and I was pointing out to some of the other people, some of the architects, many of the architects and designers that we revere never bothered to get an accredited license in America. You know what I mean? Like, so many of the people that we study in school, they may not have their license. There are plenty of licensed architects that work there. All that really matters is that you can deliver the project and deliver the drawing. I think when it really matters the most is when you're a sole practitioner or you're in charge of reviewing specific drawings. It just really depends on which career path you go into. And for me, it just it never made sense. Plus, as I mentioned, I'm dyslexic, extraordinarily ADD. So, and it's a matter of public safety and public health. I am not going to get my license. I've run major companies before. I work with people all the time, but I always work with people that are great at those things. Know your strengths and work with the people that are great at the things you're not. That's a great rule for business.
I absolutely agree. So you've said multiple different ways throughout the last hour that you're not interested in helping bad people build a good business, that you only work with good people doing important work. I think that's an easy principle when you have the marketing position that you have to be selective. But how did you build to the point where you could afford to operate that way? Or when did you realize that capacity?
Well, I found myself in situations in the past throughout my career where it just became apparent that I was doing myself an injustice by helping other people continue to grow their business. So I very quickly left. With my last practice, Hanbury, that was certainly not the case. I absolutely love all those people. I still play trivia with them. I want nothing but the best for them. They're amazing. They're great people. But, when I decided to leave that, I had like the best job in North Carolina. I worked with like 40 of my friends. I get to hire them all. It was amazing. It was like, I genuinely be friends with all those people to the day I die. So for me to leave that, I had to set a certain amount of principles for myself to be able to make it worth my time. And, I've spent my entire life building a reputation and a career based on honesty and collaboration and being easy to work with. Not always easy to understand, and sometimes I'm a pain in the ass. I get it, but like also too, just like, I'll do whatever I can to have somebody be successful or a project be successful. And I built a career on like that. I cannot jeopardize my entire last 30 years of my life by working with somebody else who's going to blow that up immediately. It takes a lifetime to build a reputation, and it takes an instant to destroy it. And so, one, there's like a business case for that. Two, life's too short to work with assholes and narcissists. I'm good. Like, I have no desire to continue to add to that. There are enough of those people in the world. I want to help good people make a difference, have fun, get paid my value. Just exactly. That's a guiding principle in my life. And so for me, I try to keep my costs down as low as humanly possible. So it affords me the ability to be able to do that. I'm not going to say it's not hard. It is hard. It's hard to find the right clients. I mean, doctors, lawyers, bankers, they're all significantly more creative and more innovative than architects are. I mean, we get really upset when people say that, but it's true. We are like so stuck in our ways on how that we're going to do things, and being able to think about things in new ways is scary because we're so risk averse. So finding the right clients is hard, but also finding the right clients that are willing to pay you, but that are also, ideologically aligned. So you feel good about yourself going to work every day. I can't authentically help somebody grow a business or tell a contact that I've known for 30 years that they should work with somebody that I know is going to not do them right.
I would hope that there are some individuals that are listening to this podcast and be like, we could really use an individual like William Dodge. What's the best way to get in touch with you? And are you looking for new clients right now? And what size of firm do you typically, is there like any size constraints or things that like really get you going?
No, I think for me, it's not a size constraint situation. It's the ability to be able to make decisions. Sometimes you'll have a small firm that has 20 different people that are involved in decision making, and everybody's got an incredibly different direction. Or you'll have a firm of 500 people where it's a couple of people making the decision, and that's the direction it's going to go. So I would just more, for me, working with people that are actually able to make a decision, because otherwise it doesn't matter what I'm offering. If they're not able to implement anything, then it just becomes completely useless. That said, for me, the clients that I'm looking for the most, again, are the ones that are trying to do good work. And good work's relative. It's like, what is good work? Does that mean design? Does that mean, work that impacts your community? It can be any of those things. But for me, the clients that I'm most looking for are clients that are looking to grow. That sometimes that means in terms of size, but sometimes that means just in terms of quality of work or quality of, portfolio or type of work that you're doing or type of staff that you have. Or they're looking to transition into new markets, new locations, or new project types. Or they just need a fresh look at, fresh set of eyes on what they're already doing. My first client, when I ended up going out on my own, was a firm, Sanders Pace in Tennessee. They're one of the best firms in the Southeast. They're amazing. They had called me, and I don't normally work on project specific stuff. They just happen to be good buddies. And so they had called me to help them try and, facilitate essentially a design retreat so they could help to distill down where they wanted to take the firm over the next 20 years. Like, how do they start to look at, not necessarily thinking about immediately, but planning to think about firm transition, et cetera. And so, for me, any firms that are doing something like that in terms of transition or thinking about the future of the firm, I think is something that's incredibly useful and interesting and somewhere I can offer value. My main thing is like, I've got to be able to offer value. If I can't offer value, it's not worth my time. It doesn't matter how much you pay me. It's not worth my time. I'm very much a believer of like, life's short, make a difference while you can, because you only have one chance.
So you mentioned that you were just having a conversation with a student about licensure. What is your advice to new graduates coming out right now, especially with the technology shift and everything else that's happening on the horizon?
And I clarified this when I was talking to him. I was like, I may not be the best person to ask about this, but I'm very much a believer that licensure is important for some people. And it is important if you can get it, and it will add value to you. But I've never thought of myself as an architect. I'm a designer. Architecture is just a medium that I practice in, right? But my point to him was he was looking at some schools abroad that may not have that accreditation might not transfer to back to America. And my point was who cares? Try and go, learn as much as you can, get as much of a diverse and varied experience as you can, specifically focused on the kind of stuff that you want to be doing for the rest of your career. Because the last thing you want to do is go somewhere that checks this one box, but then it boxes you out of being able to learn all this other life-changing experiences, et cetera. Like, go where you're going to learn the most and be happiest, and then figure that stuff out later. And my point to him was if you go to Delft or wherever else it is, if that doesn't transfer back to America, who cares? Because you can go and get a job at a firm that's got licensed landscape architecture, whatever. And it ultimately doesn't really matter as long as you've got the degree and the knowledge to be able to do the project. The only time it really matters is if you're a sole practitioner who has to be able to seal their own drawings. But if you're working for a bigger company, it's less about where you went to school and more about what you know. That's my advice. That is very different advice than most people would give, but that's just my advice. I'm not an architect. I'm not a landscape architect. I'm none of those things, but I play one every day, and we're pretty successful at it.
This summer, join me for Innovation in the Built Environment, a professional intensive from the University of Michigan's Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning, built for practitioners who are ready to move from thinking about transformation to actually leading it. Learn more at beradicallybetter.com. That's beradicallybetter.com. Hi, Disruptors. Thank you for joining us today on an episode of Practice Disrupted. If you like the content for today's show, you can find all of our past episodes over on practiceofarchitecture.com/podcast. Be a part of the conversation by joining me, our speakers, and other disruptors in our community at practiceofarchitecture.com/community. Our social media handle is Practice of Arch. That's Practice of ARCH. We'd love to hear from you, so feel free to drop us a DM and say hello. Tune in next week for a new conversation on change in the profession.